As a history teacher, I'm often fascinated by how wars get started, but I'm downright excited to find out how they end. Today our lesson question is, how did World War II come to an end in Europe and the Pacific? Today it's our goal to learn about the end of World War II. In order to do that, first we want to describe the Allied strategies for winning the war. Then we want to identify the events leading to the end of the war in Europe. And finally, we want to explain how the Allies achieved victory in the Pacific. But as we move through this lesson, listen out for these words. First, your academic words: demoralize, entrenched, and strategy. And then your domain-specific words like atomic bomb and D-Day. Remember, if you ever get lost, you can always use your glossary to help you. Our lesson question is, how did World War II come to an end in Europe and the Pacific? Obviously, this is a two-part question, so we first want to look at turning points in Europe, and then look at the turning points in the Pacific. See how they meet together to get us to the end of the war. The United States used a Europe First strategy, and it's exactly what it sounds like. The Europe First strategy sent more troops into Europe, and it used fewer troops in the Pacific. The idea behind this was that we were going to defeat Germany first, and then, once we defeated Germany, we would round up all of our forces and we would move them all to the Pacific to defeat Japan. Our lesson question is, how did World War II come to an end in Europe and the Pacific? Well, we started by looking at our Europe First strategy that was taking place in the United States. So since we started out by focusing on Europe first, let's take a look at the turning points in Europe. The Allied forces, which were the United States, France, Great Britain, and the USSR, wanted to create a three-pronged approach. First, we wanted to fight the Germans from the USSR over here. Then we also wanted to fight them from Great Britain over here. And then we wanted to fight them from North Africa over here, eventually poising ourselves to be ready to invade Nazi Germany. Let's take a closer look at this. Here again is the northern point of Africa, which I'm going to be focusing on. So 100,000 American troops lined up here in Morocco, and the British sent troops here on this side. And what the British then did was they fought General Erwin Rommel, who was a German tank commander, here at the Battle of El Alamein. The goal there was for the Americans and the British to squeeze the Germans out of northern Africa and force them on retreat. When we succeeded in doing that, we were able to regroup Allied forces up here and move over to Sicily. When we got into Sicily, that cleared the Allies to move into Italy. And in July of 1943, we were able to successfully remove Benito Mussolini from power. And when we got him out of power, all that was left for us to deal with on the European front was Adolf Hitler. The Nazis' 1942 summer invasion of the Soviet Union stalled in the city of Stalingrad. Now, it stalled because the Nazis encountered the USSR's winter months, and this froze, literally, a lot of their forces. German troops then began a 5-month siege of the city. Stalingrad was particularly important. A, it was named after Joseph Stalin, and B, it was a huge manufacturing city. The Germans wanted to control those resources, especially the oil that was being manufactured there. The casualty rates were extremely high on both sides. Now, the USSR had a larger fighting population than the Germans did. And again, this became a very personal fight for the USSR's leader, who was Joseph Stalin. This was his city. It was literally named Stalingrad after him. Adolf Hitler wanted to humiliate Joseph Stalin by taking over his city, but Stalin was having none of it, and his fighters were fierce and they were dedicated. The Soviets won their victory in 1943. And it was a major turning point for the war because the Germans had been so negatively impacted. They lost so many people during that large battle at Stalingrad. Now, why was the Battle of Stalingrad such a turning point? Well, there were a number of things to take into consideration there. First, it was the end of the German advance. Once Germany had gotten as far as they could go into the USSR. They hit Stalingrad. They couldn't go any farther. There was a huge loss of German soldiers. It was the beginning of the German retreat. Up until this point, Germany had had a lot of successes, especially with implementing its blitzkrieg attacks. But here they've hit a wall in the USSR, and this is going to mark the point where they have to start retreating from battles. There was also an exhaustion of German supplies. Remember, Adolf Hitler wanted to take over this manufacturing area and take oil for himself. He didn't succeed in that, and so his own resources were being depleted, and he had no way of reaccumulating those things. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the commander of the Allied forces in Europe. Remember that we had a three-pronged approach coming from the USSR, coming from North Africa, and then by Eisenhower's design coming in also from Great Britain. Now, after the war, he was elected President of the United States. Let's take another look at an important day in World War II history in which Eisenhower would have been instrumental in. The invasion of Normandy. The invasion of Europe began on June 6th in 1944 in Normandy, France. The first day of the landing is known as D-Day, and this is the largest amphibious invasion in history. Amphibious meaning it's coming from the water and it's moving to the land. Let's take a quick look at this map. We can see the American forces invading here on Utah and Omaha Beach, and then the Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches were other Allied forces like the British and the Canadians. Now, there were 156,000 troops that came in from these amphibious boats and things coming in on D-Day. The fighting lasted, or the Normandy invasion, the fighting in Normandy, lasted 3 months through June, July, and August. But again, D-Day was just one day. Now, throughout those 3 months, about 400,000 people from both sides of the fighting passed away. They were killed, and many more casualties or many more wounded people. In that 3 months, the Allied forces pushed the Germans out of northern France, and Paris was eventually freed from German control. Remember when I said that 156,000 troops were coming in? But by the end of those 3 months, there were over 1 million United States troops in Europe at that time. And this marked another major victory for the Allied forces.
Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
After the Allied forces successfully invaded Europe from Normandy, things started to go downhill very quickly for the Germans. A German counterattack failed at the historic Battle of the Bulge. This is where Germany really sort of lost the war. And by April 1945, Allied forces advanced on the German capital of Berlin. The German leaders surrendered. Many of them were forced to stand trial at the Nuremberg trials, where they were tried for crimes against humanity. Obviously, Adolf Hitler would have been involved in that, except that he committed suicide once he realized he lost the war. The Allies had successfully won the war with Germany, and this was a huge Victory in Europe Day. They called it VE Day, Victory in Europe. You can see standing over the crowd, here's Winston Churchill with his cigar right here, and he's holding up 2 fingers, which we sometimes consider the peace sign, but during this time it was a V for Victory in Europe. Our lesson question is, how did World War II come to an end in Europe and the Pacific? Well, after the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies won the war in Europe, and that was the main turning point. But remember our Europe First strategy in the United States. Now it was time to move all of our fighting forces back to the Pacific and look at the turning points in the Pacific. The Allied strategy in the Pacific was called island hopping. What that meant was that the Americans would start on a smaller island that was not a Japanese stronghold. They would take over the smaller islands as they went along, and they would make their way over to larger Japanese strongholds, over to the Philippines, and eventually making their way over towards Japan. Now, one of the more famous battles that was fought near Japan was the Battle of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was an island, and it had airfields that allowed a U.S. attack on the Japanese mainland. The battle lasted for 36 days. The United States wanted to take these airfields to get us into position to attack Japan. Japan had 21,000 entrenched fighters in Iwo Jima. Entrenched means that they were actually dug in. They were ready to be there for a very long time. Only 1,038 Japanese were captured alive. Remember, it's the policy of the Japanese not to be captured. They would kill themselves before that happened. The United States had 31,000 casualties. There was incredibly a fierce amount of fighting going on at this time. You can see over here our soldiers putting up the American flag during the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, because of how much suffering was going on during this battle, how many casualties there were, it really got people to start thinking. The Japanese were fierce soldiers ready to sacrifice themselves at any cost. It really made the Americans start to think about using new technology like the atomic bomb to put a quick end to the war. Imagine if the Japanese were willing to sacrifice so much for such a small island, and we hadn't even gotten to the Japanese mainland yet. What would happen to the Japanese population in its entirety if we actually started fighting on Japan's actual home turf?
Landing craft and 10 waves advance on 3,000 yards of beach.
Once the Allies controlled Iwo Jima, we had a platform for which we could attack the Japanese mainland. When you see this picture on your screen, this is Tokyo, Japan. The United States was able to use firebombing. Again, in Japan, many of the buildings were made out of wood, so bombings like this one were able to quickly decimate a city. Allied forces began these bombing campaigns on the Japanese mainland by the spring of 1945. Military and also civilian targets in Japan were attacked. Why civilian targets? Well, because the objective was to destroy military targets and also to demoralize Japanese citizens. Remember the extremism and the nationalism that was going on in Japan at this time. Their fighters saw it as dishonorable to even return home if they were captured by the Allies, and much of Japan felt this way. The casualties were extremely high. However, Japan still would not surrender to the Allies. So they needed to come up with something that would really get the Japanese's attention. And we did that with the atomic bomb. In the summer of 1945, the United States finished the first atomic bomb with a top-secret group called the Manhattan Project, a group of scientists that developed the atomic bomb. And what this did was it split atoms, and it created a destruction force many thousand times greater than that of like a stick of dynamite. Now, scientists had been developing an atomic weapon since 1942, but it was time to try it out in real wartime. President Truman decided to use these weapons in Japan. We actually used them twice. First, we bombed Hiroshima. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, which forced the end of the war. First, like I said, we bombed Hiroshima. We did this on August 6th, 1945. That bomb killed 70,000 to 100,000 people. But still, if you can imagine, Japan refused to surrender. And I will tell you, even the United States even flew over Hiroshima first. We dropped pamphlets and said, we are going to use this new weapon, this new technology that we have. You need to get out. You need to get away. Japan wouldn't hear about it. They allowed us to go ahead and drop the bomb, and still they didn't surrender. So the United States decided to drop another one 3 days later. We bombed Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. That had the same effect, and it killed 40,000 people. A United States invasion at that time would have cost more than 1 million lives. We needed to get Japan to surrender, and we needed to do it quickly. So after August 9th, Japan actually did finally surrender when they saw the vitality of the atomic bomb. Japan officially agreed to surrender on August 10th, 1945, officially ending the war. In this photo, you can see the Japanese officially signing their papers of surrender. The Japanese formally surrendered to U.S. General Douglas MacArthur on September 2nd, 1945. This marked the official end to World War II. If we put it on a timeline, we can see some of the events that we've been talking about. We can see the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942, extending to 1943. Then, in 1945, we can see the atomic bombing of Japan when Japan officially surrendered. It's important to remember that there are also other things going on that we could add to our timeline, such as the German invasion of France in 1940 and the official start of World War II.